Originally to be number 15, El Guapo Chris Gutierrez taking on the underground king of the bantamweight division. I'm talking about Montel Jackson.
How excited were we, Craig?
Early on last week, that fight was dissolved. Montel Jackson couldn't make the walk, so it was announced that the Mongolian Knight, Alatengheili, would be taking this matchup in on short notice, Matt, in this loaded Shark Tank of the bantamweight division. And when you look at this fight overall, Matt, Alatengheili was already getting ready for a fight. He was supposed to fight my guy, a personal favorite, not Leonardo Santos, no, Rani Yaya, another Brazilian grappling ace. And for Alatengheili, that could have been an opportunity at a coming out party, but it ultimately gets scrapped. So now, instead of facing that wily vet Yaya, he gets an opportunity at the rankings. And this is where it gets really interesting, because for Alatengheili, coming off a long layoff, coming off a big win over fellow Canadian Chad Anheliger, gets that decision win, and that's a big feather in your cap. That's an experienced fighter that a lot of West Coast folks will know, but he hasn't been active, and Alatengheili's had that throughout his UFC tenure. He comes in, he takes on one tough out in Dana Bakary, and they have a fight of the night way back in 2019. And Alatengheili in the UFC, 4 wins, 1 loss, 1 draw. We remember that draw against Gustavo Lopez. It would have been an Alatengheili win, but in the 3rd round, he grabbed that fence and he lost a point. Overall, the loss, it's to Casey Kenny, a guy that we thought would be around forever in the bantamweight division, but he's nowhere to be seen.
A forgivable loss, though. I know a lot of people might forget Casey Kenny, but he was a super talented fighter.
It is. So Alatengheili has this good opportunity. For Chris Gutierrez, he was supposed to fight. Again, I can't stress this enough, how good Montel Jackson is, and Gutierrez was a pretty big underdog in that fight too, so now you get this matchup to where, if we break down Gutierrez really quickly, we know him as the leg kick king. Against Pedro Munoz, they almost went tit for tat in that respect. Munoz gets the knockdown when he switches to southpaw and lands that big left hand. It drops Gutierrez. He spends the rest of the first round on top, and Gutierrez really couldn't get into a rhythm. He was a big favorite against Munoz in that fight too. But when you watch Gutierrez fight, really high guard, really high. He's one of the bigger, taller guys at 135. And when it comes down to this one, for Alatengheili, if you saw over on my Twitter, I'm going to call it Twitter for this one, I said Alatengheili is like the Todd Helton of MMA. Do you know why I said that?
No, I'm curious though.
Todd Helton is one of the top 3 all-time baseball hitters with 2 strikes on him. He had 265 career with 2 strikes on him.
Played at altitude though, which
Alatengheili, that 2 strikes, it matters how the pitcher's throwing the ball.
It's still, you have a higher average at altitude than you would otherwise.
But when you look at it for Alatengheili, the reason I say this is he could be at a 1-2 count, but he's always got a little bit of that wrestling in his back pocket, and he's got bricks in his hands. And training at Fight Ready with guys like Richie Long that was able to get the win last weekend, Eddie Cha, Santino DeFranco, it's going to just continue to sharpen those skills of Alatengheili. So I like the camp for him. I like the Helton comp, but unlike Todd Helton, I don't think Alatengheili in MMA would ever hit over 300 career.
I don't think he would. It is going to be a really interesting fight, though, and I'm glad, and I do agree with what you said about Chris Gutierrez. When he's in the driver's seat of these fights, he can go downhill and beat just about anybody. He lands great combinations. He has shots that ultimately accumulate over time, which is really important. Not only the leg kick, he will go to the body sometimes. He has good combos to the head, too. And it is his volume to go along with the power, right? It's not just that one big shot that's going to put his opponent out. Yes, he does have good power, especially up the middle with his hands, but still, it comes down to the combinations and how often he can land them. The problem is, though, if he's like a backseat driver, he's never shutting up. He's complaining about everything. He's not the greatest when his opponent is the one leading the dance and forcing him to think on the fly because it doesn't allow him to throw those kicks when he's backing up. And I do think that's what a lot of this comes down to. And for Alatengheili, I don't think he's going to land a ton of takedowns in this fight, right? I think he's going to go for a few of them, don't get me wrong, to try to back up Chris Gutierrez. But if he can use the threat of the takedown to just get Gutierrez backed up and put question marks in his mind, I do think Alatengheili could then start to land shots down the middle. Now, I don't think he's going to outstrike Chris Gutierrez for large portions of this fight, just minute after minute, but I do think he can land big shots. And if he lands enough of those big shots, especially early with a full gas tank, I think he can hurt Gutierrez because Gutierrez does have this one issue where he's a little stiff on the feet. He will stand a little high up with the posture.
But when he backs up, and sometimes when he lands a shot to the body, he drops his hands, his head's up, and then he's moving his feet. So there's a target there.
Exactly, and that's where Alatengheili could definitely, again, I think it does come down to just the threat of the takedown. I'm not sure how many he's going to be able to complete, and I do think Gutierrez is going to threaten quite a bit up the middle, especially with the knee, but if he can just use the takedown to force Gutierrez back, it does make the fight a lot more winnable than it would be otherwise, because if we just see Gutierrez marching forward, throwing kicks up the middle, front kicks, leg kicks, we probably know how this fight's going to go, right? It's going to be difficult for Alatengheili to start moving his feet and evading some of those bigger shots, but if Alatengheili can use the wrestling, and again, I mean it more as like a defensive mechanism for his striking, I do think he can have some success.
Well, if you look at it for Gutierrez, again, he has a stutter step of a weight cut. It was the start of last week where the fight was thrown out, and then all of a sudden he gets Alatengheili, who had a fight on the way anyway, coming up this Saturday against Ronnie Yaya. Matt, the rhymes continue. For the first UFC Academy winner over in China, that's Alatengheili. His strike differential in the UFC, only 6 total fights, but it's a negative 1.64. So when you're fighting in a negative, and your 2-strike hitter, you end up at 4-1-1 already.
Swinging for the fences.
With the promotion, Matt, if we consider Gutierrez a pretty big favorite in the matchup, I'm assuming the fans are going to go there on Topology. I'm going to say over under 75% Gutierrez.
I think it's going to be over.
They're wild this week, Matt. 862 total votes, 93% Gutierrez, 66% by decision for the 7% that have Alatengheili, 32% by knockout, 53% by decision. So who do you have in this matchup?
I have Chris Gutierrez personally. I didn't have him in the last fight. Hopefully we do get a rebooking of that one. But again, stylistically, this is a much more favorable matchup. And I do feel like a lot of people are buying low with Chris Gutierrez right now. I know he didn't look great in the Munoz fight. Munoz was able to kind of out Chris Gutierrez himself. But still, Munoz is one of the better fighters in the division. He has a wealth of experience against high-level opposition. So I do have Gutierrez in this matchup. But I'm really curious to see how this fight goes. Because again, I do think Alatengheili with that forward pressure can at least offer some interesting moments in this fight.
And Alatengheili shut out his last opponent in and Helliger, all 3 judges scoring at 30-27. You know, for Gutierrez, the 2 knockout wins that were on the way in against Pedro Munoz. You got the big one against Dana Bakary. You got another one against the all-time legend and future Hall of Famer Frankie Edgar. I have Chris Gutierrez. Casey Kenny was able to mix things up a little bit in the matchup.
Exactly.
And Kenny's one of those guys. It's just constant volume. He never stops. Gutierrez is pretty darn good in that respect as well, and he can do it through all 3 rounds. So both of us in this one going with Boss Rootin'. El Guapo, Chris Gutierrez to get the win. Let us know down below in the comments section who you have. Some big-time matchups, including at the top of this card. It's a featherweight marquee. Yusuff taking on Barboza. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.